Hi, Dominic, and thanks very much for joining me today to talk about plays. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. It's a beautiful day.
It is the first decent day we've had all week.
Yeah. Mon-
Lovely. Okay, so we're going to start first of all, and it's probably at the heart of all the questions, really, which is what criteria do you use to enable you to choose a play?
Okay, well, of course, there are a number of criteria that I choose, a number of criteria that I'm thinking about when I'm choosing a play. And I guess the first thing to say is I'm not always choosing a play in isolation. So I'm choosing a play to go within a season, which might be a few months or it might be a whole year. Um, but I guess the first thing that I'm thinking about is the audience. And that's really at the heart of my job, is to think about what is it that my audience want to see, or what do I think they would like to see that they haven't already seen, and what is the experience that I can give them. And we have a very sort of wide-ranging audience at the SITs. So there's some kind of older, regular, traditional theatre goers. And then we have a lot of young people and perhaps people who don't come very often. So I'm very mindful about making sure that within a season that I present work that will appeal to all our audience. Also within choosing a play, I have to think about the cast. I have to think about the makeup of the cast. So the gender balance. We try now to be as balanced as possible in terms of gender, and opportunities to be as diverse as possible within our casting as well. And then I'm thinking about the balance of new plays and classic plays. So we commission a number of plays, but we also, the tradition of the SITs has always been as well to have at its heart probably the classical repertoire. So again, the audience, we find that in Glasgow there's an audience for that traditional canon, the Shakespeare's, the Restoration comedy, those kind of things, but also plays that resonate in a more contemporary way, plays about Glasgow, plays about people living in Glasgow, about the modern experience. So making sure that balance is there as well. And then I guess last but by no means least, cost. I have to put together a season of plays that we can afford, that makes the budget balance. And of course, that's an incredibly difficult thing to do and very unknown thing to do, because you just don't know. You have to guess really about how many people you think are going to come and see it. I guess those are the main criteria, but also connected to that, nowadays a lot of our productions are co-productions, so we need to think about what other theatres want to do with us and what they're suggesting. I need to think about when commissions are ready to be put on. And I guess in general, just thinking about how we as a theatre want to respond to the world that we live in at the moment, and that really affects what the programme is as well. We need to be relevant, I think, in order to exist.
Um, so, Dominic, when you talk about what your audiences want, how do you find out? What are the tools and mechanisms you use to find out what your audience would like to see?
Well, I suppose the bluntest tool is whether in the past they've come or not. I think that's the easiest way of telling whether you're doing the right job or not. Are people coming to see the plays that you program? But I guess also is a mixture of just experience. I've been doing this job now for quite a long time, so hopefully I have some hunch about what I think an audience wants to see. But I think it's absolutely part of the artistic director's job is to kind of understand the the audience and to understand the kinds of things that interest them. But I think, and I think it's particularly the way the world is at the moment, that we are in conversation, I think, with our audience all the time, whether, you know, I guess that's mainly on social media, but you get a sense of what they like and what they don't like. So I certainly don't feel to a huge extent that the audience are something kind of other out there that I'm kind of having to sort of imagine in the dark. I feel and I want to encourage that there is a conversation that goes on between us and the audience, and I think that is something that will and has to happen more and more.
So you've talked about the how the audience will drive your decisions, or is the most important thing your decision making. Is there something you might particularly look for when it comes to either the characters or the story or the actual play? Where does that feature?
Well, I need to put on work that I think is good. So, you know, I think that the quality of the text, shall we say, is very important to me. And I guess that as a theatre, we have, again, a kind of reputation with pretty much text-based theatre, and the programme is pretty much embedded in the traditional theatre canon, I guess. So I guess from a personal point of view, quality of text, and that can also include new writing, it's really important to me. I guess in some ways, what makes a good, is that interesting to talk about? What I think makes a good.
That's very interesting, and I think that's something people struggle with when we say, if you're entering a festival, for instance, you know, the first point is if you don't have a decent text, you're making the job harder for yourself. It can be hard with the limitations that small clubs have, but I think then they might come back and say, well, they often do, say, well, what is a good play then? That's a question that we're asked frequently.
And I think that's a hard question to answer, but I'll just try and maybe outline a few of the things that I think about. I guess the first thing is whether it's a good story, and I think we all want theatre to be telling good stories, and to engage us as an audience. There's nothing worse, I think, than being bored in the theatre. Of course, there are many ways in which stories are told and in which stories can engage us, but I guess a sense of tension, a sense of really wanting to know what happens next is something that I really respond to. And I think that's what you see in all great drama, whether it's Hamlet or Zeus Story by Edward Albee. You know, that sense of what is going to happen next is something that, on the whole, we tend to really want in the theatre, so just being gripped, I think, is important. I think the quality of dialogue is really important, and I guess connected to that is a sense of believability. You know, do I believe this situation? Do I believe who these characters are and what they're saying to each other? And I think a good play, even if it's from a story point of view is quite wild or outrageous, if it creates the world well enough, if it creates the characters well enough, then we as an audience, or even as a reader, can be are willing to believe even the wildest actions. But I think that sense of a world, being drawn into a world, for me are really important. I guess another thing that I think is really difficult for a playwright is is to do with theatricality. I think writing dialogue is one thing, and there are some writers who can write fantastic dialogue, but it isn't necessarily drama or dramatically interesting. And I think the greatest playwrights are able to combine fantastic dialogue with an innate sense of theatricality within a scene. And I think that that's something that I'm always aware of when I'm reading a play. That otherwise, I think it can feel very static. You can have great dialogue just between two people who are sitting and talking or standing and talking, but for me, there's always an added ingredient, which is when there's actual kind of physical action within the scene embedded in the play. I mean, sometimes you can make it up, of course, and you can have a scene where somebody's cleaning and another person talking, and you're kind of you're adding the drama. But I think a great playwright embeds physical action and dramatic action within a scene.
I have another question that I'd like to ask you then.
Sure.
That I was thinking about from, again, going back to something you said earlier on, and working in the kind of classical canon, the challenges around diversity and gender, when so many roles at that time were written for men. And the reason why I think that would be interesting for SCDA members is they have very often a very small pool of local actors. Yeah. And then the challenge is, how do they find a play for their demographic?
Yeah.
And I wondered, you know, your approach to that. I mean, having seen Cyrano and the use of you know, the kind of females cast in traditionally male roles. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I think this is something that has really shifted over the last few years, both in terms of just practice and in terms of what an audience can now expect to see. So, I guess in big classical shows, like whether it's Shakespeare, whether it's something like Cyrano, those kind of plays, I think now that the men playing women, women playing men, I think that is accepted and in some ways is to be encouraged, because I think you know, traditionally those female roles that don't exist, and I think a play that is in some ways kind of mythic or classical in the sense of something that sort of exists in all time, a story that you know, whether it's a Greeks or whether it's you know, Shakespeare, as I say, or one of those kind of classic plays. I think there are real opportunities to cast, well, particularly women in traditional male roles, and that's certainly something that I think about doing and look to do all the time now. I think and I think it's you know, I think it's completely fine. I think it's something that can really happen in the theatre, and I think can open up a whole new way in which we think of a play, or look at a play, or look at the action within a play. And you know, and I certainly think the same in terms of you know, diverse casting in other ways, in terms of trying to open up to people from all ethnicities. And again, I think that's something that, of course, we've got a long way to go, but is much more practiced now and enjoyed by audiences. So there's certainly I need to look at those issues when I'm casting a play. It's not even just a you know, a sort of preference. I need to do that when I'm casting.
Great, thank you. Just as an aside, I was at something with other community drama people, and someone was talking about a production of Romeo and Juliet in London, and it was cast by third age actors being Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
And the children and the grandchildren were the ones that were opposed to this union, which I thought would be a really interesting way, you know, to look at things. I think it's something our audience, our clubs struggle with, because they're always looking for plays that cast very tightly the way the plays are written, and I would like to encourage them to be braver.
And of course, it's harder. It's harder with what we think of as naturalism. I think it's harder with a kitchen sink drama, if that means anything. To cast outside of what is seen as a traditional casting. And I guess personally, I'm always, those plays don't interest me so much. So I'm always interested in kind of something a little bit more mythic and non-naturalistic, which I think allows for that more easily. But I think the thing about, these plays exist. It's not like no one's ever going to see Romeo and Juliet cast with teenagers again. And I think it can, as I say, I think it can open something up and for the moment be exciting and interesting. And in a few years' time, another version will come along. And the plays have lasted hundreds of years, and that's partly because they're brilliant, and they will continue to last, I think.
So if you could give one piece of advice to directors from our member clubs, what might that be?
Read, and read. I think it's about going out there and seeing what plays are out there that can be done. And I think, I can imagine that there is such a need to fill sort of so-called criteria that actually worrying about cast size or gender or suitability can end up kind of really restricting the choice people make, and perhaps that becomes the first thing rather than actually the quality of the writing and the quality of the drama. And there is, of course, so many texts out there. There's so many scripts that I think just having as great an understanding of what the potential repertoire for the groups are is probably the most important thing.
Thanks for taking the time to speak to me today, Dominic. I'm sure our members will find it really interesting to hear what you look for in a play.